Good morning. How are we all? Awake. Yay! That's the first point. I was sharing that last year on this weekend, I actually preached at Sindel Baptist Church, and I said, just promise me, like somebody, tell me to say no to an invitation on the thing, except that it was more specific to them because their first service starts at 9, and then the production meeting starts at 8. And so it was all getting earlier, and I just went, anyway. But so I'm feeling quite fresh this morning, as it would happen. But it is really good to be here. I am privileged to be a good friend of Christine, and through extension, David. And I was saying the only other time I've been here was when you opened these facilities, and it was good to be here for that service. But good to be back again this morning. Now, I want to start by telling you a story. Couple of stories. There's always stories. When I was 11, I had in my local area and in my world was a teenage girl named Alison. She would have been, 16, 17, just old enough to seem like super old, like when you're 11 years old. And she was beautiful, and she was basically everything that I wanted to be when I grew up. She had this beautiful, long, silky blonde hair. She had a gorgeous singing voice. She always had the lead roles in our school musicals, so she was just everything. And then if she turned her attention to me, it was just like giddiness, it's just like, hi, it's kind of a bit fangirly type thing. So that year, though, the year I was 11, for Christmas, I got a present. And I decided to pay Alison the ultimate honour, and I named this gift after her. Right? I mean, what else could you do, right? Do you want to see what it was? Yes. Are you ready? Okay, first, in my defence, you have to remember this would have been actual silky, it's at like 10 years, 20... right? Okay, it's a while ago now. But this is Alison the monkey. And if you come and look closely, you can see on the back here, there's a singed bit on the back of her head, which is a testimony to her value, because she became the currency with which my brothers would mock me and tease me. And so one day my brother, I've got Alison the monkey, like as brothers tend to do. And I'm like, no, not Alison, like the drama. And I launched, and he went, no, like that. And her head landed on top of the stove. Sorry, Alison. So this is Alison, the ultimate tribute to my teenage friend. Another story about another person in my world. When I was as growing up, our regular babysitter that would come into our household was a lady named Marion, and she was a young adult. She was in our church. Again, she was the lead role in the musical. There's a bit of a trend here in terms of the types of things that mattered to me as I was growing up. But she was in the church musical. She was the blue Salty, the singing songbook. Does anyone remember the kids' praise thing? She was Salty, so just absolute goals. But she was actually studying music, and so she would come, and when she was looking after us, she'd always be in some mode of preparation for an exam or a performance or something. And one of the key things I remember there is that she taught me how to braid hair. And the way she did it was she gave me some sort of basic instructions, but then she sat there with her drum pad on her lap doing drills for ages, hours possibly, and I just braided her hair and unbraided it, and braided her hair and unbraided it. And then as she got older, she got married. I was invited to her wedding, but one of the precious things that I got to do as part of that was the two little flower girls who were mutual friends of ours. I braided their hair for the wedding. And I didn't name a monkey after her, but I felt like that was a nice tribute or a nice way to connect. Now, I don't know about you, but can you think of some Alisons or Marions in your story of like these influential older people who are part of your particularly formative years, but journey across the years? Like it might be that they were significant to you learning a skill, that you remember them teaching you or coaching you in some way. It could be that they were just particularly important to you learning your sense of place and learning your significance as a young person and stepping into who you are. But I want you to have a think. Some research that I have found just captivating has indicated that one of the key ways they can predict for young people, or a key indicator of a young person retaining faith into adulthood. Right? There's a whole lot of things, obviously, that as you think about growing up in faith and growing through youth and those younger years, and then finding yourself into the adult space, what it would be that would be part of why you might still be following Jesus. And you could probably think of your own story in that as well. But what would you say if you had to find a top one thing that would make the difference? Have a think of your answer in your head. The one thing that would make the difference between someone who's in faith as a teenager, continuing into faith as a young adult. Think of your answer. Research suggests that one of the main predictors or indicators is that a young person is known by name by 5 adults in the church. Was that your answer? Didn't want to have that in their head? No, you wouldn't have thought that, right? But it's super significant, this idea of being known. Obviously, known by name by 5 people is not like that's the start and the finish of it. It indicates that something else is attached to the idea of being known by name, right? That there's a little bit of relationship, a little bit of knowing, a bit of connection that takes place. But it's also true, that research or that data sort of bears out across generations. They did some work with seniors in churches, and they said that if they were only sort of connected to their peers, the language they would use is they would say, I belong to the seniors ministry at my church. But if they were known by people from other generations, they said, I belong to my church. Like it was a part of how they found their sense of belonging. Outside of the church space, if you look into youth mental health, one of the key suggestions or the key sort of factors that they've discovered around good mental health and connectedness for our young and well-being for our young people is that they are known by 2 adults is the language they put to it, that there's 2 significant adults in their world as well. And so you think about that, it might be coaches or teachers or other people in their world. But more recently, a global research project that was undertaken by a group called the Barna Institute, which is out of America, but as I said, global study, 25,000 plus young people were researched, including over 1,000 Australians, and they were questioned about their responses to Jesus, the Bible, and justice. And one part of that data analysis was to explore the topic of teens and spiritual mentoring. So they were able to make correlations between the level of mentoring or the level of other adult engagement in a young person's world and the other aspects of their lives in faith and outside of it. So they found these specific outcomes for people who reported high mentoring. So high mentoring was a label they attached to a person who had someone in their life who encouraged their spiritual growth. They had close personal friends who were adults in their church. They had someone in their life who modelled prayer. They attended church to connect with older people, and they had a spiritual mentor who taught them how to read the Bible. So respondents who had all those 5 things present were deemed to be classed as experiencing high mentoring. And then they made all these correlations between those people and a whole lot of other outcomes. They said that the people who registered as high mentoring or identified that way, they were reported an increased priority on being close with their family. They tended to spend more time with their family. They had an increased priority on caring for their emotional health and an awareness of that. They were able to reflect more on the understanding of their own purpose. They were more likely to care for people in poverty. They were more likely to be generous with their money. All these outcomes were 4 to 5 times more evident for people who were in that high mentoring category than others. And they correlated it with young people being more justice motivated, more Bible engaged. And then their sort of summary of that was that young people who'd experienced high mentoring registered as more resilient disciples, which has a whole lot of stuff tied into it. So that to say that any young person who had this sort of significant adult relationships, adults who were investing with them intentionally, and who are committed to their support and growth in those ways that I mentioned, they recorded just so many more positive outcomes to significantly higher reporting levels. Adults are an extremely powerful influence on the faith development of young people. And that may not be like new information. It might not be like, oh, I didn't know that. Like that, it's like, yeah, I get it, right? But what we're seeing over time is more and more that is quantifiable in the research and the data that we're collecting. And as we get to have a greater sense of, or we're able to quantify that value, I think it needs to move us to more of a deeper conviction about how that plays out in our own world and our own lives. So Psalm 78, if you've got a Bible handy, I encourage you to open it up and read along with us. Psalm 78. So this psalm is a maskil, it's called, which is a form of liturgy. So this was designed for use in public worship. A maskil is like a song or a poem or a prose that's intended firstly to teach something, but also to be repeated and engaged in such a way as we absorb it. And they would have said it, sung it again and again so that they heard the truth, they knew the truth and didn't forget those truths. So Psalm 78, just picking up at verse 2, says, I will open my mouth with a parable. I will utter hidden things, things from of old, things we have heard and known, things our ancestors have told us. We will not hide them from their descendants. So we're going to draw from all of history. We're going to draw from all that we know of the repeated story of God's activity towards his people. We're going to use parables and metaphors and any other tool that's available to us to ensure that we can reveal that truth and then find ways that is applied to our lives. So what is the truth? In picking up at verse 4, it says, we will not hide them from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power and the wonders he has done. He decreed statutes for Jacob and established the law in Israel, which he commanded our ancestors to teach their children. We will tell the next generation. He is praiseworthy. I'm just shortening. I haven't got time for two words, okay? We're just going to put it all together and just moving on. Praiseworthy. And this is new teeth, you know. It's not really. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. He is worthy of our praise. He is a God of power and ability, and he has done wonders. And that is to say that he has put that power and love and grace to work for his people in the past and now, in our time. We will tell that to the next generation. And verse 5 and 6, it goes on to say, picking up start at verse 6, so, always important, if there's a so what? So, the next generation would know them, even the children yet to be born, and they in turn would tell their children. They in turn would tell those. If you look at that, that is a lot of generations. You know, the next generation, even the children yet to be born. And then they would put their trust in God and would not forget his deeds, but would keep his commands. Amen. Right? The intended outcome is that generation after generation after generation would come to know this God of power and wonders, and they would come to trust and love him for themselves, and they would know his love and his guidance and his protection and his mercy and his grace and his truth and his justice and compassion and revelation and light and hope for themselves in their own lives. That there would be this flaming baton of faith that is passed from, genuine faith being passed from generation to generation. That each generation would not only encounter God and respond in faith for themselves, but then they would endeavour to see the other generations to also put their faith in God. But then in verse 8, Asaph gets a little more direct. We'll tell the next generations, we'll strive to see faith grown in the children of our of our unborn children. We're all pretty excited about that. We can get motivated and energized. But then it says in verse 8, then they would not be like their ancestors, a stubborn and rebellious generation whose hearts were not loyal to God, whose spirits were not faithful to him. And yeah, those ancestors, hey, they sound awful. Fickle bunch, disloyal, forgetful, disobedient, faithless. But you can imagine it might sort of slowly dawn on the readers and the listeners, wait, is he talking about us? Like, are we the ancestors to the emerging generations? Are we going to be the old people that we're warning them about? Slow dawning. But then if you continue through that passage, the following verses go on to detail that meandering path of faith for the Israelites that had walked in generations before, all the way back to when they were delivered from Egypt. And then there's the grumbling and forgetting in the desert and complaining, and there's victory and there's defeat and there's deep trust and worship and there's rejection and despair, and all the way till now in the time of David. So they would not be like their parents. Asaph is exhorting God's people to forge new, vibrant, devoted paths of faith that each generation would seek to launch the next generation further and deeper in their faith. That with each new generation, there'd be a multiplication of voices that declare this praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, this power, the wonders he's done. That each life becomes a testimony amplifying the truth and the goodness and the faithfulness of God. So the people of God heard these words, they learnt them, they repeated them so as to impress on their hearts and write into their own faith response to God a true sense of purpose and conviction to encourage emerging generations in faith and missions. And I think you read a passage like this, and as old as it is, and as ancient as the text is, it has a fresh message for us today. I think it comes with its own sort of helping of conviction and challenge and encouragement for us this morning. And three things I want us to think about in our response to that. I think we're called to testify, be intentional, and we're called to empathy. Testimony, intentionality, empathy. Testimony. The first, Asaph exhorts us to know and declare the goodness of God. So that means we've got to know first, right, before we declare. So we've got to learn and teach God's law and instruct in the way of Scripture, but we're also called to then fuel each other's faith with stories of God's praiseworthy deeds, the personal stories of transformation that God is working in us by his power, those examples we've seen or experienced of his wonders and his miraculous acts. I wonder for you, where have you seen Jesus at work in your life? I loved our opening encouragement there to be thankful to God for something. Where have you seen him at work? Like today, yesterday, who have you told about what God is doing in your life or what you've seen him be up to? If we think about emerging generations particularly, they're known as a show me people. Don't just tell me, prove it. Don't just give me words, give me story, give me something I can look at and aspire to and be encouraged by. Let me appreciate the reality of the impact that God is making on your life. What prayers have you seen answered? What peace has he brought to you in circumstances where peace shouldn't have been there? What joy do you experience despite your circumstances? How has God carried you through your pain? We will tell the next generations, we will show God at work. Thousands of years of Christian history up to this day and today in the lives of people that you know and that you can touch and be near to and understand more deeply. We're called to have a vibrant testimony of God. If I was to grab a microphone now and run around the room, we're asked to be ready to talk about the praiseworthy deeds of God and the wonders he has done. Are we building and working on that keeping that testimony fresh? And secondly, as I said, I think we're called to be intentional about this. Asaph uses this action-oriented language. He's quite emphatic about how he's drawing and calling believers to be mindful and purposeful in what we say and how we say it and why. We will testify to our children and their children so that they will know how awesome and mighty and powerful and generous and kind and creative and loving and good and faithful God is, so that they too could put their trust in him. So their lives would be radically impacted by the transforming grace of God, so that they could live in this in obedience and surrender and submission to him, so they wouldn't experience the consequences of the sinful stubbornness and rebellion and disloyalty like generations before them. Any of us who've been alive for more than 3 minutes, and particularly as we've walked with God, things go wrong in life, right? Things are hard sometimes. Things are challenging, but we also know that God is the master of taking that brokenness, there's any shame and guilt and regret around our decisions and choices, or the things that have happened to us, and drawing them into the story he writes of our lives, one of redemption and restoration. His forgiveness and his grace remake us. We've got a story to tell of how God does that with things that go wrong. It's incredible. But despite how confident we might be that God can do that, would we not want to prevent something of that for our younger people, to maybe help them to not have to make the same mistakes or go quite so far into the places of regret and shame and brokenness that we have? Would we want more for our children, for them to encounter God more supernaturally, to experience him more fully, to be on his path sooner and longer, to walk more closely with him, to be shaped by him in every way in their sense of purpose in his kingdom mission, to be the ambassadors of reconciliation and justice and care for the least, and to form their identity through the lens of their Creator? And our young people cry out for that wisdom, that experience, that perspective that we as adults in their world can offer. Now, they might not be great at expressing that need or even being really good at receiving, what comes with that, but it is actually the cry of their hearts. This always makes me think of whitewater rafting. Has anyone done that before? Where you have a navigator on your raft, and as you're going down the river, he's like, up here, or there's a bit where we're going to have to all jump to this side because it pulls this way, and we're going to have to paddle. When I say go, do the, because they've been down the river before, and they don't just sort of chuck you in a boat and say, off you go and hope for the best. But they're with you as you try and navigate these rough waters that they're aware of. And I feel like that's the intentionality that we are called to with our younger people. Hey, there's some rocks up ahead. I want to help you avoid them. I want to help you get around them with the least broken bones and blood that we can manage. I want to be more part of that. And I think that, as I say, the cry of the hearts of young people, and this bears out anecdotally, but also research tells us this, is they want this kind of support. They want this sort of investment. Walk with me. Encourage me, support me, teach me, champion me, advocate for me, pray with me or for me, learn with me. They need the intentionality of adults in their world. And then finally, we're called to empathy. The pace of change is just so fast. And as I watch generation to generation kind of emerge, I'm just like, wasn't 2 minutes ago, this was the new thing. There's so much that is happening they're so globally connected, they're so materially endowed, but then they're this sort of shifting landscape that they have to face in terms of the culture and the climate. They're so much more aware of what's happening on a global scale. They're formally educated to higher levels than most generations before. And there's so many things that are happening for emerging generations. But when I think about my own childhood, my Allison days, it doesn't seem that far away. Yet it's a world away from what our younger people are experiencing. And there's a world of information at their fingertips before they have the maturity and the tools to decipher it, interpret what it all means for them, translate it. That young people are able to explore Christian faith as just one of many on a sort of smorgasbord of faith options that are being presented to them. This barrage of social media messaging that attacks their sense of self and identity and purpose and value and worth. They need our help to understand the timeless message of Jesus in a new and changing context. Because in a world of these sort of personalised consumer experiences that we live in, there's this sacrificial, others first, life-surrendering call of the gospel is arguably even more countercultural than it's ever been. So for our young people to receive this generational message of a praiseworthy God, it requires our empathetic engagement with the realities of the path that they're trying to walk, the life that they are living. The opposite of empathy is judgment. And it's really easy to sit in the seat of judgment. We can so easily criticise what we don't understand. And when we do that, we create a gap, right? That's the generation gap, when we're like, oh, those young people, those old people, those whatever. Other people, we create this gap of connection and compassion. And when we think about passing on the message of Jesus, that distance means our influence and our voice gets distant from our younger people. Anytime we hear ourselves saying things like, those young people, or anything we do with these general sort of sweeping statements, we want to remember that those young people are individual young people. Lots of little lives that are trying their best to, I've just lost my notes, trying their best to navigate their way through a very different landscape of life. Now, when I was younger, I was a poet. I know you can imagine. Anyway, and instead of journaling, I wrote poems. So that dated that's how I sort of expressed myself. And so I have kept some of those journals, much to my own embarrassment, but they make for good sermon material. And one such book I would have been 14, 15. I'd written a lengthy poem after the breakup of a long-term 6-week relationship. And I'd broken up with this boy, shattered. The final line of the poem says, "People tell me to get on with my life, but he was my life." Right. Yeah, been there, right? You feel that. Feel. Deep feelings. Next page. Next day. Different boy. First line, he smiled at me today. Right? Miraculous healing. Woo! It was amazing how I bounced back from the depths. But if that was me today, that would be on my social media profiles. Both of those stories. And that would have been this very public breakup and story, and then this very public recovery. That would have opened me up to other people joining in that story about what that makes me, how quickly that happened, or whether I deserved it, or other people whose prefrontal cortex was equally undeveloped as my own, weighing in on how I should deal with that and how I should respond to that. And when I think about that, it moves me to the deepest empathy for our young people, because they are not any smarter than I was. They're not any more mature than I was, and yet they do have these platforms and these means of communicating and inviting, intentionally or otherwise, other people into the mix that are not helpful. So it makes me, when I see young people trying to navigate that world, man, that must be tough. That must be hard. You don't even know that there was another way to not be in life, because you've just grown into this screens and social media world. But it's tough. And I think empathy is a muscle we need to develop, and we need to keep building if we are going to stay within hearing distance of emerging generations. That's how we close the gap in life stage and experience, is that we seek first to understand. What must it be like for you to be you and to navigate life with all the complexities that you have to navigate through? We need to filter those stories we hear and the things we see through that grid of empathy, and then that will grow in us this greater sensitivity, and also I think a greater sense of urgency to support our young people to grow in wisdom and discernment and understanding. So 3 thoughts for us to consider this morning, and I wonder what God might be saying to you. We'll get the team up and we'll move into the keys department. So that's it's serious, yeah. Because if you put a key there, they'll know. I see what's happening here. I meant to think Yeah. What's God nudging us with today? We will tell the next generations the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord. We will, I'll get out of your way and you can start setting yourself up. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds. Firstly, what does that mean for you in terms of testimony? What does it mean to keep, like maybe that's the thing that God's putting his finger on this morning is for you to be more intentional and more active and more alert to the activity of God in your life so that you're ready to tell the story of what God's up to, that you're sharing your own journey and you've got a live story to tell of a powerful God, a God who works wonders, a God who is praiseworthy, a God who changes our lives. And then the second point about being intentional, like who is it that God has placed in your world? It could be children, grandchildren, people here connected through the church community, other places you are, where we get to be the ones that speak into the lives of other people, not from a place of judgment, not of the, when I was your age, kind of story, but more about, what, I have been your age, but in a different world. And I want to understand more about I know for me, my poetry reflects it was a hard time of life. What's it like for you? How is it that some of my story can sort of connect in, some of the wisdom and the experience, the knowledge that I've gained from the years that I've journeyed, from the number of times I've been down this river, how can that help you? How can I be intentional about sharing that wisdom? And some of that requires just staying close enough relationally. That's the known by name by 5 people. And maybe that's the step for some of us, is just to be more intentional about who we know and how well we know them, just as a smiling face, a welcoming place. Because when we think about connecting young people into a church community, our main priority is relationally holding them in a place where they can then encounter God for themselves. Right? That we be the place they want to be, the place that they feel they belong, the place where they're greeted enthusiastically, where they're not, they don't feel the judgment, they feel the empathy. There's people here who love me, who want to know about my world, who want to, be part of hearing the stories, who want to learn things from me because I know different things than them. How do we keep sort of developing, exercising that empathy muscle so that we can keep those younger people close to us, and we can then be those that tell the praiseworthy, these great stories of who God is and how he's transformed our lives. Let's just take a moment, personally bow your head, close your eyes, do what you need to do to get a little bit of reflection space. And I wonder if you'd be brave enough to ask God just to nudge you, like what is it that he would particularly have you consider this morning? What's a way to respond, or a thought to explore more deeply? A person to sort of shift into more of an intentional space of investment? Maybe it's asking for forgiveness for the judgment and those ways in which we other different generations. Maybe it's a prompt to be just stepping into just the spaces and more alert to the opportunities that God gives us to be those people that know our young people by name, that draw them into community, that position them to hear the good news of who God is and to pursue a life of faith and walk with him. God, thanks that you are the God of all generations. Thanks that you have revealed yourself to us, that we have a story of your goodness to us, that we do have a testimony of how you've been at work in our lives. God, that you have carried us through some challenging things, that you've rescued us, that you've extended grace to us on the other side of really bad decisions. God, as we've bumbled our way through various roles and aspects of our lives, that you've extended your mercy and your grace and your compassion to us, and you carried us. God, we're just grateful for who you are to us, who we know you to be. We're grateful for the adults and those who've gone before us that were significant to us, in understanding who you were and understanding who we were in you. God, would you prompt us to be those adults in the lives of others? God, that you'd use us to declare your goodness, that we would multiply the testimony of as we see in Scripture and as we know continues for thousands of years, God, your goodness. And as each one of us take that up, as we take a next step, as we just turn the dial a little bit and become perhaps a little more intentional about that, God, we're just excited about what you might do in a community of people who are all switched on to that. And the young people who are connected into this space, that they might feel that real sense of warmth and welcome. God, we look to you. Have your way, we pray, God.